Okay, this is another reaction video. Do Germans talk about World War II? What do they teach about the Holocaust? Feely from Germany. Please click like, share, and subscribe for her as well as down there for me. I would appreciate it. This is part two. I did part one yesterday. This is part two. And let's see, learning about World War II other experiences. Let's see what this is continues on. This is what she did yesterday about what do they teach in Germany and what did her personal experiences were as far as what she was taught in school. But let's move on.
Now, since I'm not the only one of 84 million people in Germany, and as I said earlier, curriculums vary a lot throughout the country, I wanted to make sure that the experiences and opinions of other Germans are included in this video as well. It actually received over 230 submissions to my survey that I sent out, so thank you guys so much to everyone who took the time to fill that out. I will say it was a lot of work to go through it all, and I won't be able to mention every single answer here, but it was fascinating to read, and I'm going to summarize it as best as I can. And I'll also be sharing quotes from the survey with you guys in German because I wanted people to be able to answer this in their native language, but I'll add English subtitles. To give you guys a general overview at first, I did get answers from people of all ages, from 13 to 65, and from all over Germany, and even a couple responses from Austria. And to my question, how well would you say school educated you about World War II, the Holocaust, and the Third Reich? Nobody selected not at all. About 2% said insufficiently, 14% said basics were covered, but it could have been more, 47% said very well, and about 38% even selected almost too well. The topic was hashed and rehashed.
Again, 47 and 38%. That is very good, very well, and almost too well. Okay, because if I do my math in my head, that's 77 plus, that's about 85% very well, almost too well. So that's very good.
Over and over again. So I think that shows that most people definitely felt like the topic was taught about very intensely. All other questions were open-ended questions, by the way, so I can't tell you the exact percentages, but I'd say the overall consensus was that the topic was taught in a rather objective, but also serious and very respectful way, while being brutally honest, and most people said that it was always age-appropriate still, and was slowly building up throughout the grades.
Which is good. Which is a good way to do it. I think so. That's a good way to do it.
Nina from Dortmund wrote, for example, in der 8. Klasse haben wir erst gelernt, was das Dritte Reich war, wer Hitler war, die NSDAP und so weiter. In der 9. dann großer Fokus auf die Judenverfolgung.
Okay, when this is done, she's done reading in German, I'll read it in English for you.
In der 10. Klasse dann den Krieg im Detail besprochen, Filme und Dokumentationen geschaut, die teilweise sehr brutal waren, aber einfach nur die Realität abgebildet haben. Schuld wurde...
Okay, in 8th grade, we first learned about what the Third Reich, Hitler, and National Socialist, what Democrat, DAP, etc. were. In 9th grade, the main focus was the persecution of the Jews. In 10th grade, we then discussed the war in detail, watched films and documentaries, some of which were very brutal, but were simply portrayed reality. We were never...
wurde uns nie eingeredet. Immer nur Verantwortung und das Bewusstsein, dass...
We were never told to feel guilty. It was only about responsibility and the awareness that fascism is not
Faschismus keine Meinung
an
ist,
opinion, but a crime. Okay.
sondern ein Verbrechen. Corbinian from Hessen. Meiner Meinung nach wurde das Thema zwar häufig relativ brutal durch Bilder, Videos, Filmaufnahmen etc., aber dennoch altersgerecht behandelt. Häufig wurde bei Opferzahlen und Holocaust-Morden tief ins Detail eingegangen. Dennoch war die Behandlung des Themas meiner Meinung nach genauso angebracht, weil man dadurch überhaupt erst den schieren Schrecken und die unfassbare Unmenschlichkeit begreifen konnte. Es war häufig nicht schön anzusehen, doch genau so haben wir gelernt, was dieser Abschnitt...
Okay, in my opinion, even though the topic was often taught in a relatively brutal way, with pictures, videos, film recordings, etc., it was still age appropriate. Often the number of victims and Holocaust murders went into great detail. Still, I felt the treatment of the subject was just appropriate because it allowed one to grasp the sheer horror and incomprehensible inhumanity in the first place. It is often not nice to look at, but it is how we learn this period of German history actually means.
Schnitt der deutschen Geschichte überhaupt bedeutet. And Alex from Karlsruhe said, es war angemessen, respektvoll den Opfern gegenüber und informativ. In Geschichte haben wir uns kritisch damit auseinandergesetzt und haben uns Fragen gestellt wie, was war die Ideologie der Nazis? Was waren ihre Ziele? Wie konnte es dazu kommen? Es gab auch einen Vortrag von Salih Perel, einem Überlebenden des Holocausts bei uns an der Schule, der für alle ab der 8. Klasse verpflichtend war. Eltern durften auch kommen, wenn sie wollten. Er hat uns davon erzählt, was ihm passiert ist und wie es ihm damit ging. Am Ende durften wir auch Fragen stellen. Zum Thema Schuldgefühle hat er etwas gesagt, das mir viel geholfen hat. Ihm ist bei seinen Vorträgen aufgefallen, dass junge Menschen oft Schuldgefühle haben, obwohl sie nichts damit zu tun hatten. Das ändert aber nichts. Stattdessen ist es unsere Aufgabe, sicherzustellen, dass es sich nicht wiederholen kann. Es gab später auch noch...
Okay, I'm going to start reading this. And start, she looks like she has more to... It was appropriate, respectful of the victims and information in history. We looked at it critically and asked ourselves questions like, what was the ideology of the Nazis? What were the goals? How could this happen? There was also a lecture by Salih Perot, a Holocaust survivor, in our school. That was, sorry, it's hard to read this. I got the compulsory for everyone in 8th grade and up. Parents were also allowed to come if they wanted. He told us what happened to him and how he felt about it. At the end, we were also allowed to ask questions. He said something about guilt that helped me a lot. During his lecture, he noticed that young people often feel guilty even though they had nothing to do with it. But that doesn't change anything. Instead, it's our job to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Noch ein Vortrag von einem Ex-Neonazi bei uns an der Schule. In der 11. haben 2 Geschichtskurse, meiner eingeschlossen, eine Exkursion zu einem Konzentrationslager in Frankreich gemacht. In deutschen Religion haben wir uns mehr mit der Perspektive der Verfolgten auseinandergesetzt und welche Rolle die Kirche zu der Zeit gespielt hat. Unter anderem durch das Tagebuch der Anne Frank.
Let me go back and finish that up. Okay. Instead, it's our job to make sure it doesn't happen again. Later, there was also a lecture by an ex-neo-Nazi at our school. In 11th grade, 2 history courses, including mine, went on a field trip to concentration camp in France. In German and religion, we dealt more with the perspective of the persecuted and what role the church played in the
zu der Zeit gespielt.
Among other things.
Unter anderem durch das Tagebuch der Anne Frank. By the way,
Diary of Anne Frank.
Most people mentioned that they started talking about the topic sometime between 5th and 9th grade, but a few even said it was brought up as early as 3rd grade, and lining up with my own experience throughout all kinds of subjects. Annie from North Rhine-Westphalia even shared her experience in a video.
I think that we talked about almost every subject. Let's see, history class, for sure. German class, where we would read important literature like Anne Frank. Religion, which is also part of the curriculum in most German schools, where we would not only learn about our religion, but also about others. And then English class, because we also learned about history. French, same thing. French history, where we talked about the Normandy and D-Day and you name it.
From Oldenburg said about this: Im Geschichtsunterricht wurde recht ausführlich über das "Wie konnte sowas nur passieren" gesprochen. Der verlorene Krieg, Wirtschaftskrise, vorhandener latenter Antisemitismus. Im Kunstunterricht ging es um die Idealbilder, die sich in Bildern, Statuen und Architektur wiederfinden und um das, was entartete Kunst genannt wurde. In Deutsch und Englisch.
Okay, in history class, the topic of how could something like this happen was discussed at length. The Lost War, World War One, economic crisis, existing latent anti-Semitism. Art classes dealt with the ideal images found in pictures, statues, and architecture, and what was called degenerate art. Also, suitable reading material on the topic in English, in German and English.
Passende Lektüren. One person said that they watched The Boy in the Striped Pajamas in English class, for example, and in German class, people mentioned reading the books I mentioned earlier, but also books like The Diary of Anne Frank, Als Hitler das rosa...
Okay, when Hitler stole the Pink Rabbit in 1971, and Diary of Anne Frank. Diary of Anne Frank. Look, Anne Frank is the tragic thing about, I've always thought about Anne Frank, is that we know who she was. Okay, and what I mean by that is, look, this was just a good Jewish girl living in Holland, hiding off from the Nazis, and she was 1 month away from the Americans recapturing Holland. She was 1 month away. She was the last group of Jews that was taken away from and transported to Auschwitz. Of course, she didn't die in Auschwitz. I forget which one she died in, but again, she died 1 month before the British took over that camp. So she really 1 month, 2 months. But the thing is, her diary survived. Her father published it. It became a very popular book to read of her of what life was like, and a great time capsule. But it's something that we should never know who Anne Frank was, because she should never have had to go through this. That's the tragedy of Anne Frank, is that we know who she was because she had to go through this, and she died far too early. But it is interesting to know who she was.
Kaninchenstahl or Die Blechtrommel, and movies such as Schindler's List. A few people also mentioned analyzing Hitler's rhetoric, as well as his speech and writing style, to better understand his propaganda techniques. Hitler's own book, Mein Kampf, however, was only mentioned by one person in the whole survey, which probably has to do with the fact that up until 2016, it wasn't actually allowed to be printed in Germany due to copyright issues, so if the book was discussed in school, it was usually just in the form of extracts. In addition to learning about personal destinies from books and movies, a lot of people also mentioned visiting concentration camps. I was actually a little surprised by how many people mentioned that, especially...
Again, that's something that I would like to do, is to visit a concentration camp and see it with my own 2 eyes.
Since not every school is close to a former concentration camp, so for many, this included an overnight trip. Some people even traveled to Poland to visit Auschwitz. Charlotte from Niedersachsen said, der Besuch des KZs in Bergen-Belsen ist bei uns Standard in der 9. oder 10. Klasse, was ich wichtig fand, weil man die Dimensionen viel stärker nachempfinden kann. Zusätzlich war ein Teil unserer Klasse in Krakau-Auschwitz, was ein bis heute einprägendes Ereignis war. Von dem Lager ist ja verhältnismäßig viel erhalten und die Bilder sind mir im Kopf geblieben. Danach wurde uns auch der Raum gegeben, über unsere Eindrücke zu reden, in einer Runde mit der mitreisenden Lehrkraft. Ich würde behaupten, dass jeder Deutsche einmal dort oder in einem vergleichbar gut erhaltenen KZ gewesen sein sollte.
Okay, let me go back to that. Okay, visiting a concentration camp in Bergen-Belsen is standard for us in the 9th, 10th grade, which I found important because you can feel the dimensions much better. Additionally, part of our class was in Krakow, Auschwitz, which is a memorable event to this day. A relatively large amount of the camp has been preserved, and the images have stuck in my head. Afterwards, we were given space to talk about our impressions and around with the teacher who was traveling with us. Again, that is great to know that they are teaching that in Germany so it doesn't happen again. That is fantastic. That is wonderful to know.
Mitreisenden Lehrkraft. Ich würde behaupten, dass jeder Deutsche einmal dort oder in einem vergleichbar gut erhaltenen...
I would argue that every German should go there or to a concentration camp that is a comparably well-preserved state, at least on
Ein KZ gewesen sein sollte. Carina wrote, vor allem
at least once.
der Besuch mit Übernachtung im KZ Buchenwald war eine Erfahrung, die mir bis heute, 14 Jahre später, noch sehr stark im Gedächtnis geblieben ist. Was mir retrospektiv positiv in Erinnerung geblieben ist, ist, dass nicht beschönigt wurde. Man hat uns immer die brutale Wahrheit darüber gesagt, was die Nazis den Menschen angetan haben.
Above all, the overnight stay to Buchenwald concentration camp was an experience that I still have in my mind 14 years later. What I remember positively in retrospect is that it wasn't sugar-coated. We've always been told the brutal truth about what the Nazis did to the people, no matter how.
Egal wie grausam.
No matter how cruel.
In addition to that, a lot of people mentioned visiting museums, memorials, synagogues, Jewish cemeteries, and things like the Reichsparteitagsgelände in Nürnberg or the home of Klaus von Stauffenberg even. A lot of schools also
Klaus von Stauffenberg, I believe, is Project Valkyrie, the man who tried to assassinate Hitler in 1944 but failed.
organized a trip to Berlin, which is actually something we did too in 10th grade, and that certainly included visiting the memorial to the murdered Jews.
Yeah, that's in Berlin. That's where I was at. We had a chance to go inside, but we didn't because we didn't have the time, unfortunately.
Of Europe, among other things. And a lot of people also said that they had historical witnesses talk at their schools, like we heard in one of the quotes earlier, which I think is one of the most valuable experiences you could have, especially since today most of them aren't around anymore. One thing that I could definitely tell from the survey was how heavily people's experiences were dependent on the teachers they had. I think that's always the case in school, of course, but I think specifically with this topic, not everyone had a good experience. Sabine wrote, for example, meine Lehrer waren von der Nachkriegsgeneration, die das Schweigen gebrochen haben. Allerdings haben sie das Thema überkompensiert. Uns wurden sehr stark Schuldgefühle vermittelt. Ab der 3. Klasse haben wir Bücher über das Thema gelesen. Die waren natürlich noch nicht so brutal, aber später wurden wir nicht geschont. Wir haben grausamste Bilder ansehen müssen und waren auch in Auschwitz oder in Israel, wo wir unter anderem mit Opfern des Holocaust geredet haben. Insgesamt hat mich die Art und Weise, wie uns der Holocaust in der Schule beigebracht wurde, ziemlich traumatisiert. Ich bin später ins Ausland gegangen und habe dort erst nach Jahren ein relativ normales Verhältnis zu meiner Nationalität entwickeln können. Heute habe ich keine Schuldgefühle mehr. Allerdings tragen wir Deutsche eine Verantwortung, dass dieses Thema nicht vergessen.
Okay, my teachers were from the post-war generation who broke the silence. However, they overcompensated for the issue. We were made to feel very guilty from the 3rd grade on. We read books on the subject. Of course, they weren't that brutal, but later they weren't spared. Later we weren't spared. We had to look at the most gruesome pictures and also went to Auschwitz and Israel, where we talked to victims of the Holocaust. Among other things, overall, it was quite traumatic. I was quite traumatized by the way we were taught the Holocaust in school. I later moved abroad, and only after years of was able to develop a relatively normal relationship to my nationality. Today, I no longer feel guilty, but we Germans have a responsibility not to forget the topic.
Vergessen wird. And a person from Mainz shared another pretty negative experience. Responding to the question in what manner it was taught, they said, sehr detailliert, fast schon schwärmerisch, für die Ausländer in der Klasse sehr beleidigend, hatten eine ziemlich braune alte Dame als Lehrerin in Geschichte. Es wurde definitiv zu oft von den guten alten Zeiten gesprochen. Ich fand es schrecklich, dass sie eine Lehrkraft zugelassen haben, die schon fast verherrlichend über so ein schreckliches Thema gesprochen hat und einem jeden, der eine negative Einstellung dazu vertrat, eine schlechte Note reingedrückt.
Very detailed, almost enthusiastic. It was very insulting for the foreigners in the class. We had a rather brown shirt old lady as a history teacher. It was definitely too often spoken of as the good old days. I thought it was awful that they allowed a teacher to speak almost in a glorifying manner about such a horrible subject and give everyone who had a negative attitude about it a bad grade.
hat. I do want to say that this experience was definitely an exception, but I wanted to include it to show a few different aspects here. Other people were very lucky with their teachers though, like Lara from Duisburg. Ich fand, dass alle Lehrer es sehr gut angegangen haben, den richtigen Ton gewählt haben und uns auch bei schlimmen Bildern oder Videos vorgewarnt haben. Wer zwischendurch mal kurz raus wollte, durfte.
I found that all the teachers approached it very well, chose the right tone, and even warned us about bad pictures or videos. If you wanted to step outside for a while, you could do that too. Which is good.
And there were also a few people that still experienced the time when the topic wasn't talked about a lot in school, like Katrin from North Rhine-Westphalia. In meinem Alter, zweite Generation nach dem Krieg, war es nicht sehr detailliert und wurde eher überflogen. Das eigentliche Wissen kam nicht aus der Schule, sondern mit dem Älterwerden aus Dokus. Bei uns als Schülern kam es so rüber wie: Okay, wir können das Thema nicht aussparen, aber wir machen es so kurz und oberflächlich wie möglich. Ich glaube, erst jetzt, wo wesentlich mehr Zeit vergangen ist, traut man sich und ist nicht mehr ganz so
At my age, second generation after the war, it wasn't very detailed, and people skimmed over it. The actual knowledge did not come from school, but from documentaries as I got older. For us students, it came across as, okay, we can't skip the topic, but we'll make it as short as superficial as possible. I think it's only now that a lot more time has passed that you dare approach the topic and are no longer quite so anxious.
beklemmt. One question that I personally found extremely interesting, and that might even be useful for any teachers out there, is which topics were covered repeatedly and which ones people felt like weren't covered enough. The vast majority of these over 230 people that answered the survey agreed that the main focus was clearly on the Holocaust, so the persecution of Jewish people, while the persecution of other minorities like Sinti and Romani, homosexuals, political opponents, people...
Yeah, there were... the gypsies and so forth. Those were people that were also tormented and persecuted by the Nazis.
Of color and the euthanization of disabled people, etc., were barely covered. Other aspects that people said weren't covered enough included World War II outside of Germany, including the Pacific War, but even the actions of Germany's allies or the German invasion in Greece or Yugoslavia. Those are all things that I personally agree with too. I don't remember any of those things being part of the curriculum. And a lot of
the Pacific War between the United States and Japan and Britain was also a part of that. So was Australia and so forth. So it's a shame that wasn't taught as well.
People also said they would have liked to learn more about post-war Germany and the denazification process, also about the history of anti-Semitism and that it wasn't something that the Nazis just came up with themselves, about German refugees.
You know, Hitler gets blamed for, and rightfully so, for being anti-Semitic. But again, that was something that was rampant in post-war Germany. And he was not alone by any stretch of the imagination in that, in anti-Semitism.
And I also saw quite a lot of people sharing my experience that they didn't learn a lot about the details of the war in terms of tactics, different battles, etc., and about Hitler as a person.
I think no one is born evil, and I cannot recall that we talked about what had happened to him, why he became that kind of person. So yeah, I think this would have been also important to understand.
One thing that was very...
Yeah, I mean, Hitler was actually sent as in the military, as an army, to spy on the group of people that ended up becoming the Nazis. He ended up hearing them and agreeing with them, and then ended up leading them, so to speak. He was sent there to spy, and he ended up being their leader.
Very interesting was that about half of the people said that they really focused on how the Nazis seized power and how the weaknesses of the Weimar Republic led to that, which is what I mentioned too, that was focused on a lot in my school. But then the other half listed this under things that weren't covered enough. And many also said it should have been talked about more how we can recognize warning signs and parallels of similar developments in society today. And last but not least, this was a common point of criticism as well. Ich bereue auch, dass ich so wenig über andere geschichtliche Themen gelernt habe. Der Holocaust und der Zweite Weltkrieg hat alles überschattet.
I also regret I learned also a little about other historical subjects. The Holocaust and World War II overshadowed everything.
Which I would generally agree with. We really didn't get to cover a whole lot of other topics of recent history, but at the same time, I also think that it was important that we covered the topic so intensely, like Markus from Hildesheim says too. In der Schule hatte ich immer das Gefühl, dieses Thema wäre überrepräsentiert. Wenn ich jetzt mitbekomme, wie schlecht einige darüber informiert sind und wie diskriminierendes, rassistisches und rechtsradikales Gedankengut in und rund um Deutschland wieder aufkommt, wünsche ich mir, dass all diejenigen sich nochmal gründlich damit beschäftigen und damit dafür sorgen, nichts aus dieser furchtbaren Zeit auch nur ansatzweise.
I always felt this topic was overrepresented at school when I now realize how poorly informed some are about it and how discriminatory, racist, and right-wing extremist ideas are resurfacing in and around Germany. I wish that all these people deal with it again thoroughly and make sure nothing from these terrible times repeats or not even partially.
Zu wiederholen. Britta from Berlin says, bei mir kam die Message, dass das auf keinen Fall nochmal passieren darf und während den Anfängen definitiv rüber. Ich hatte auch noch viele 68er-Lehrer, deren Lebenswerk es quasi war, das Schweigen zu brechen. Ich hoffe, dass die jüngere Lehrergeneration das Erbe weiterführt. And even
Okay, let me go back and
den Anfängen definitiv rüber. Ich hatte auch noch viele 68er-Lehrer, deren Lebenswerk es quasi war, das Schweigen zu brechen. Ich hoffe, dass die jüngere Lehrergeneration das Erbe weiterführt.
I definitely got the message that this shouldn't happen again under any circumstances and resist the beginnings. I also had many 1968 teachers whose life's work was to break the silence. I hope the younger generation
hoffe, dass die jüngere Lehrergeneration
of teachers carries
das
on
Erbe
the
weiterführt.
legacy.
And even Laura, who became a history teacher, said this. Natürlich habe ich zwischendurch, wie wohl fast jeder deutsche Schülerin, das Gefühl gehabt, dass es zu viel thematisiert wird. Im Nachhinein finde ich es aber gut. Es hilft heute sehr dabei, rechte Parolen, wie Gaulands Aussage, der Nationalsozialismus sei Vogelschiss gewesen, einordnen zu können.
Of course, like almost every German student, I had the feeling that this was being discussed too much. But in hindsight, I think it's good. Today it helps a lot to classify right-wing slogans such as Goeland's statements that National Socialism was bird shit. Well, okay.
In terms of how present the topic is outside of school in Germany today, people shared a lot of different opinions and experiences, and I won't be able to include all of them in this video, but many mentioned, for example, that some German TV channels pretty much show Nazi documentaries 24/7, which is definitely true, and I know that that can be pretty surprising for people visiting Germany. Some people said that the current political developments all around the world worry them and that they feel like German politicians should be more actively fighting that. Some mentioned how this whole topic of inherited guilt, Erbschuld, is still weighing on us as a country, but most people said that they think that Germany is doing a rather good job dealing with this topic, even though it's not perfect, and that it's important that the German government commemorates the victims of the NS regime on days like the International Holocaust Remembrance Day or on German Volkstrauertag and other memorial days. And some people also shared how difficult it can still be within their own families. I'm just going to read one quote from a young German that represents that pretty well. This is from Vivi, 18, from Lüneburg. In der Gesellschaft ist das ganz unterschiedlich. Es gibt halt so zwei Lager. Die einen finden es nicht genug, ich ebenfalls, und die anderen zu viel, darunter auch viele Jugendliche. Gut finde ich den Umgang in den öffentlich-rechtlichen Medien. Gerade zum Beispiel Kika hatte eine gute Kampagne, um es den Kindern näher zu bringen. Der Krieg und ich.
It's very different in society. There are just two camps. Some find it not enough, me too, others too much, including many young people. I do like the way other public broadcasting is dealing with it. For example, TV channel for kids, Kiki TV channel for kids, just had good campaign on bringing it closer to children. I think it was called The War and I.
Ich heißt das, glaube ich. In meiner Familie wurde viel totgeschwiegen, gerade was die Leute so gemacht haben.
There's a lot of silence in my family, especially regarding what people had done.
Alle meine Urgroßväter waren im Krieg
All
und
of my great-grandfathers were in the war, and some were in company
teilweise Jahre danach in
for the
Gefangenschaft.
years,
Wer weiß,
for
was
the years after. Who knows what atrocities they committed
für Gräueltaten sie damals begangen
back then. Yeah, that is something to to think about. Your great-grandfather may have committed atrocities during the war. Who knows? That is interesting.
haben. Jedoch arbeiten meine Mutter und ich viel auf an Kriegstraumata und Fluchtgeschichten.
My mother and I try not to work through. My mother and I try and work through the war, trauma and refugee background. My grandparents
Meine Großeltern kamen als Kinder aus Ostpreußen.
came from East Prussia as children. However, some of the family,
Jedoch sind einige in der Familie immer noch der Meinung, dass
it shouldn't have discussed. Some have already taken their guilt
darüber nicht gesprochen werden soll.
and secrets with
Einige
them to the grave. Yeah.
haben ihre Schuld und Geheimnisse bereits mit ins Grab genommen. Last but not least, is it okay to ask a German about World War II, the Holocaust, and Nazis, or is that offensive?
Well, it's to me, it's something that a lot of people are no longer alive. I mean, you talk to her about what was like World War II. She doesn't know. She didn't experience. She's only 29 years old. This is 2023, and so that means she was probably born 1995. I guess that's when. Yeah, 20, whatever, 1994 maybe. But yeah, that is, what are they going to tell you? They probably can tell you more than you know based on what they were taught in school.
Coming from a foreigner. Now, I didn't include this in my survey, but based on my experience, I can say yes, you can absolutely talk to us Germans about World War II. I even feel like a lot of Germans appreciate talking about it with outsiders from another country, especially when they find that they're educated on the topic. However, it's definitely important to us to stay respectful. I found that Germans can be a little more sensitive to jokes about the whole topic, for example, and not every German is going to be in the mood to talk about it, especially if people are still in school or just graduated and might be a little tired of the topic. But generally, this is something that we're very open about in Germany, and most of
Yeah, I don't think you should talk Hitler jokes or things like that, basically what she's saying, but it is something that is taught, which is good, that they teach about their history, that they know about their history.
us will not feel personally offended just because you bring up our dark past. Let me know if you guys agree with me on that or not in the comments, but I recently came across this video by Radical Living.
Hey Hans, I was wondering, since you're German and all, do Germans still feel like guilty about World War II? How do you feel about it? Are you hungry? You look hungry. I'm gonna make us some sandwiches, okay? Be right back. I mean, your grandfather must have fought in the war, right? You ever talk to him about how it was, being on the evil side and everything? Oh God, I think I forgot the sausages in the car. I'm gonna go grab them, okay?
And then he just ends up making up more and more excuses and ends up driving away because he really wants to avoid talking about the topic. And even though I know it's satire, of course, and I'm not trying to deny that that's his reality, I just wholeheartedly disagree with the message of this. That's just never been my experience at all. By the way, just in general, it's a lot more common in Germany to talk about politics and difficult topics, even with strangers. And that's also why Germans often ask Americans very directly about controversial topics in the US and how they feel about them. Again, thank you to everyone who took the time to fill out the survey, and to Annie for recording a whole video. You can find her entire response on her YouTube channel, by the way. If you went to school in Germany, what are your experiences with the topic? Which aspects would you like to add? And if you're not from Germany, how does your country teach about World War II or their own difficult past? And was there anything that surprised you in this video? Let me know in the comments below. I hope you found this interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for Feely from Germany. Please click like, share, and subscribe for her as well as down there for me. This is Do Germans Talk About World War II? What do they teach about the Holocaust? Feely from Germany. Again, good topic, good issue, good discussion. Have a good rest of your day. Thanks for watching.